Okay, parts of the brain. So a little bit of a review. It's like I said, I like a lot of repetition. Repetition helps me learn too. So if I had to have a general name for this part of the brain in general, what would that be? The overall, this whole thing. What's that called? Cortex. Yeah, that's going to be your cortical region. Your cerebral cortex. Perfect. Okay. Going down here, this is going to be your brainstem. Your brainstem has an uppermost portion called midbrain. Middle portion of the brainstem that sticks out a little bit is called pons. Lowermost portion of the brain stem known as medulla. And Alexa's favorite part is back here. That's called the cerebellum. Okay. In general, when you think about the sorry to get what wrong Alexa did I say this? I said Alexa, but she said, are you Alexa too?
No, you're good. I just cracked that nose really loud.
Oh, okay. Didn't pick it up. Okay. When it comes to brain, this is just basic parts of the brain. You're going to know them really well as we go through. I have my little stuffy, brain stuffy. Here it is. The brain overall is a very nice stuffy. It was given to me by a student years ago. Here's my cerebellum back here. Here's the cortical region. And here's my brainstem. Okay, does everybody see where we are? Just looking at a lateral view. Okay, now when I think about the brain, it has a lot of little grooves here. Can you see all those little grooves? All those little red grooves right there? Okay, those grooves have a name. Does anyone know what those grooves are called? These are just teeny grooves in the brain. Teeny grooves overall. Sulcus. Yeah. So the grooves, so that's plural. So grooves, plural, are called sulci or sulci. Okay. Singular is sulcus. So, and these are the small grooves. Like you see here on this brain, there's just lots of little small grooves, and those are sulci. Singular sulcus. Okay. Now there's larger grooves in the brain also, and the best way to see that is if I look at the top, there's going to be a really large groove here. If you can see it, it's kind of sewn in. That divides the left and the right halves of the brain. That's a large groove. Does anybody know what's called a large groove? Let's write that down. It's a large groove. So the brain has small grooves, these little sulci, and then it also has large grooves. The large grooves are known as fissures. F-I-S-S-U-R-E-S. So the fissures are going to be the large grooves that the brain has. One all the way up here. Here's another kind of fissure. We'll label it here in a minute. Okay, the larger grooves, the really large grooves, are known as fissures. The smaller grooves are sulci. And then we also have folds. You can see that. There's also folds in the brain. Example of the folds, so in between the sulci here, you can see these are all folds of the brain. If you've ever seen the surface of a brain, it's like a fold in between. Those folds have a special name. Does anybody know what they're called? Gyri. Yeah. So the plural will be gyri. That's plural. So singular would be gyrus. G-Y-R-U-S. For one fold, it's called a gyrus. Multiple folds are called gyri. Okay. And those words, nothing more than sulci are the small grooves, fissures are the large grooves, and the folds here, they're going to be gyri. Okay, all these paler pink are the gyri. Okay, questions about that? Okay. Now, as far as the brain itself, it has different lobes that we need to consider. Okay, if I want to talk about the lobe here that's most anterior, does anybody know what that's called? That's your frontal lobe. Great. Okay. As far as the frontal lobe is concerned, what's it associated with? So if I had damage to my frontal lobe, what would I have trouble with? Does anybody know what it does, what its function is? Memory. Okay. Let's go ahead and say more specific than memory. Memory is a little bit different, but frontal lobe. Let's just say cognition. Okay, cognition. So one of the functions of the front that's associated with the frontal lobe is cognition. There's going to be a really important function that has to do with physical therapy that's located in the frontal lobe. Motor. Yeah, motor activity. Right. Okay. So if you think frontal lobe, you can think cognition, personality. If you want, we can even write personality in there. That's fine, because somebody who has difficulty with their frontal lobe is going to have personality changes. Most important thing for a PT is going to be that motor function. Okay. Let's talk more about the motor function. And if I had to label, there's an important sulcus that's located right here in the center of the brain. That's just a sulcus, right? So that sulcus is just going to be a small groove, a really important small groove, located in the center of the brain, and it is known as the central sulcus. It's located in the center, so it's the central sulcus. Now, like I said, those sulci go along with the grooves or the folds next to it, the gyri. There's a really important gyrus that's right in front of the central sulcus, located in the frontal lobe. Really important gyrus. We're going to talk about it a whole bunch. It is known as the pre-central gyrus. Like I said, it's nothing more than a fold, and this particular fold happens to be right in front of the central sulcus, so we call it the pre-central gyrus. Another name for pre-central gyrus is going to be your primary motor cortex. Okay, everybody see where I am? So frontal lobe, think motor, cognition, personality. Motor function is going to start in the pre-central gyrus, which is also known as the primary motor cortex. Got it? All right, moving on back. Let's look at the next lobe. Let's talk about this lobe of the brain just behind the central sulcus. The central sulcus separates the frontal lobe from, what's that lobe of the brain that's next? Anybody know? It's going to be your parietal lobe. P-A-R-I-E-T-A-L. Lobe. So your parietal lobe. So your central sulcus separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. Does anyone know what the parietal lobe is associated with? Sensory, great. Somatosensory, awesome. So let's go ahead and put, what's your name? Kayla. All right, Kayla. So Kayla says that in the primary lobe, it's associated with somatosensory information coming in, and actually somatosensory information is ultimately delivered to this area, which is called the post-central gyrus. It's also known as the primary somatosensory cortex. So all those somatosensations that we talked about previously, pain, temperature, food touch, fine touch, proprioception, vibration, are all delivered into the central nervous system, specifically here in the postcentral gyrus. So that is the primary somatosensory cortex. Those are all conscious somatosensations. Okay, here in the back of the brain, right here. Does anyone know what lobe that is? Yeah, great, occipital. OCCIPITAL lobe. And if I had to assign a function to the occipital lobe, what's that associated with? Anyone know? Vision. Awesome. Yes. This is where vision is processed. Getting there. Let's talk about this here, the thumb of the boxing glove. Does anybody know the name of this lobe? Temporal. Yeah, temporal, temporal. Temporal lobe. And what's the temporal lobe associated with? Can you hear me? Hearing? Yep, hearing. Or processing auditory information specifically. It's associated with hearing. When we think about the cerebellum, does anyone know what that's associated with? If you have problems with your cerebellum, do you know what kind of problems you're going to demonstrate or present with? Balance. Yeah, balance is a big one. So let's put balance down here. So balance. And one more. So balance and coordination. We're going to spend an entire class on how the cerebellum is responsible for balance and coordination. Okay. Now, I labeled some of these large fissures, or I talked about one of the large fissures. There's a large fissure here that separates the right and left halves of the brain, and I pointed it out on the stuffy here. So here's this large fissure right here. Okay, that large fissure that separates the left and right halves of the brain is known as the longitudinal fissure. You're going to see it better on the next drawing, but I'll just label it in here as well. Okay, it's called your longitudinal fissure. Like I said, we'll see it again in a minute, a little bit clearer. But then there's another popular fissure that you need to be aware of. It sits right here. It separates the temporal lobe from both the frontal and the parietal here. Does anyone know the name of this fissure? Again, big groove, this big groove that separates out the boxing glove. It's called your lateral fissure. Questions about that? These are all basic parts. We're going to come back to these over and over again. Okay, you're going to see them later on today too. Everybody clear on functions with lobes? Got it? All right, let's move on. That's parts of the brain. The next one's going to be gray versus white matter. Okay, thinking about gray versus white matter.
Yeah, just that.
Do you have a question?
Oh, no, I got it. I just thought I missed something. But
Okay, that's fine. I'm happy. Please ask me questions. If something isn't clear, you might not be the only person that doesn't get it. So sometimes I just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. It seems like you guys are okay with keeping up with my drawing pace. Everything good with that? Okay. And if you have questions, please feel free to ask me. I like questions. It just makes me know what you're getting, or what is clear or what isn't clear. And I'm happy to explain it multiple different ways too. Okay, here we go. Back to sections of the brain. So I have two different things drawn here. Okay, let's start with this one over here. This is a kind of section. So if it were, this is a brain. If you took a saw and just sliced right down the middle, right? So separating front from back. If you have a plane coming down here, what plane of section would this be? Frontal. Yeah, frontal or coronal section. Okay, great. And like I said, this is just through the brain proper. So if I had to label this, what would this part of the brain be? Here we're seeing a little bit of the inside, not a lot of it. But what would this part of the brain that we've talked about? We've looked at sagittal sections here, but what's this called? Cortex. Yep, that's going to be your brain cortical region. So let's just say basic cortex. Right? Looking at that. Now, I mentioned it just briefly a little bit ago. Does anybody remember the name of this fissure? Now you can really see it. See how this fissure is a real deep invagination that separates left and right halves of the brain? Yeah, that's my longitudinal fissure. Now you can really see it. Okay. And then going on down, here are here's my brainstem again. Uppermost part is the midbrain. Middle part sticks out. It's my pons. Lowermost portion is going to be my medulla. Okay? So that's just a kind of giving you some sort of orientation as far as what you're looking at. Nothing more than a frontal or coronal section right down the middle, and you're looking inside. Okay, we're going to talk about what these things are here in a minute. Now, enough with that one. Let's move over here. This is nothing. This is a transverse section through a spinal cord. Okay, it's nothing more than the transverse section through a spinal cord. So if it were me, a saw would just come right on through and cut this way. Okay. All right. Now, the title here is Gray versus White Matter. Does anyone know what the difference is? What's the gray matter and what's the white matter? Has anyone heard these terms before? Ooh, good. Myelinated. Tell me, is that going to be gray or white? Yes. So myelinated is going to be the white part. Okay, that's going to be the white matter, which means that the gray. What other parts? So basic parts of the neuron we haven't really talked about yet, but here is your. Let's see this. I have an orange. I'll make it green color. Okay, so the white matter. Let's just make it. If you think about the string of a balloon. Okay, that's going to be my white matter. Okay, and I think about it as a string of a balloon. And the white matter is nothing more than myelinated axons of neurons. Okay, neurons have something. They have axons, but they also have something known as a neuronal cell body, and that's going to be here at the top. So the gray matter is nothing more than the neuronal cell body, and the white matter are the axons coming out of that neuronal cell body. We'll talk a little bit more about neuronal histology here in a few classes. But in general, you should understand the differences between gray and white matter, because there's lots of terms that are associated, and the terms are going to be different whether you're in the central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system. Okay? So here I've labeled this gray, and this is going to be known as a cell body. Okay, that's your gray. And then over here, you're going to have your myelinated axon. And that's going to be your white matter. Okay? Everybody see that? So all I've done here, this is just a representation, or my representation, of a single neuron. The gray matter is the cell body. Myelinated axon is going to be green. That's going to be your white matter. And what happens is that these neurons don't exist in isolation. They kind of clump together. So what happens is all the cell bodies kind of clump together. When these cell bodies clump together, they make areas of gray matter. And coming out of the cell bodies are your myelinated axons, which all traveling together make areas of white matter. Does that make sense? Thinking about it? You think about balloons on a string. The strings are all going to be your white matter. Your balloons are all clumping together. Those are all your gray matter. Now, thinking about gray matter, let's just talk about the central nervous system has a name for gray matter. Okay, gray matter in the central nervous system is going to occur in just two places. Okay. It's the outer cortical region. I'll draw that in a minute. So the first place you're going to find gray matter is your outer cortical region. So in other words, in this frontal section, when I look at it, all of the gray matter, which actually looks gray, is positioned here in the outer cortical region. So what part of the neuron is in the outer cortical region?
Cell body.
Cell body. Yep, just that simple. Okay, here's your cell bodies. All your cell bodies are kind of hanging out here on the outer cortical region. Okay, I'll draw in a few of them just to kind of give you an example. These are nothing more than, your gray matter is nothing more than neuronal cell bodies. Neuronal cell bodies in the central nervous system are positioned in two unique places. First of those places is the outer cortical region. The second place that you're going to see gray matter in the CNS, in the brain, is going to be in something called nuclei. And we have some nuclei, and that's what these are islands of gray matter, or islands of neuronal cell bodies that exist in the middle of the brain. Okay, we're going to talk about them as the semester goes on, but there's some here, this one. There's going to be a big one we'll talk about, very important in sensory processing, and then there's here, these are more basal ganglia. So these are nothing more than nuclei, so we can label this. This is a caudate, C-A-U-D-A-T-E, nucleus, important part of the basal ganglia. This is something known collectively as the lentiform, L-E-N-T-I-F-O-R-M, nucleus. Again, another part of the basal ganglia we're going to talk about later in the semester. And something that's really important for sensory processing, involved in all sensory processing except olfaction, is going to be known as your thalamus. Okay? So, in the brain proper, in the central nervous system. Yes?
What's the triangle one called again? Lentiform?
Oh, lentiform. L-E-N-T-I-F-O-R-M. It's actually composed of, so we'll find out flows palus internus, externus, and putamen. Collectively is called the lentiform nucleus. But just giving you ideas of some nuclei that you might see as collections of neuronal cell bodies inside the brain proper. Questions? Did we read that? Did you have a question, Amy? No, just scratching. Okay. Did we got that? Okay. Now, as far as white matter is concerned, let's go ahead. So there's another place you can find all the nuclei in the brain, outer cortical region, or nucleus. You can also find neuronal cell bodies here in the spinal cord, in the cross section. So all of your gray matter is going to be here, and this is nothing more than neuronal cell bodies that you can visualize as gray matter inside the spinal cord cross section, the transverse section. All your neuronal cell bodies are in the middle. Here, I'll even label this as spinal cord transverse section. Okay. Now, as far as the CNS is concerned, when we talk about white matter, that's where it gets a little confusing. All of these words mean nothing more than white matter in the CNS. You're going to see them throughout the semester, but when you see these words, they mean nothing more than collections of white matter. Okay, so there's gray, so white matter in the CNS, and you're going to see them all. One word that you might hear when you see the word column, so dorsal column, we talked about that a little bit earlier, DCML. Column, see the word column? That means collection of white matter in CNS. Okay. Another word that you might hear is tract, so spinal thalamic tract. You know that that's nothing more than the collection of white matter in the CNS. All these words mean exactly the same thing. There's another one, fasciculus, F-A-S-C-I-C-U-L-U-S, fasciculus, fasciculus gracilis, fasciculus cuneatus. We're going to learn about all these things. Fasciculus means nothing more than a collection of white matter in the CNS. Another one, lemniscus. You've already heard this word today, dorsal column medial lemniscus, L-E-M-N-I-S-C-U-S. Okay, a collection of white matter in the CNS. Peduncle. There's cerebral peduncles and cerebellar peduncles, P-E-D-U-N-C-L-E. Peduncle, collection of white matter in the CNS. A commissure, C-O-M-M-I-S-S-U-R-E. Okay, and then the last one's going to be a decussation. All those words mean exactly the same thing. Okay, so the last one is decussation. Okay, decussation is where axons are going to cross over from one section of the brain spinal cord to the other. Decussation, just nothing more than white matter axons all traveling together. Okay, one important commissure that you may have heard about previously is going to be something that connects the left and right hip. So these are my neuronal cell bodies, and I'm putting out my axons. Let me make it the same color so it doesn't get confusing. I'm putting out axons from my neuronal cell bodies, and those axons are going to come and they're going to cross over to the other side and communicate directly with axons from the other side. And this is a commissure that you may have heard about. It's one of the big ones that we're going to talk about. Does anybody know what that's called? It's known as the corpus callosum. Just Nothing more than a commissure connecting a large amount of white matter coming from left to right. Corpus callosum. Okay, that makes sense. So there's a few places where you find gray matter in the CNS and the brain proper. It's going to be the outer cortical region. That's where all the neuronal cell bodies live. You can also find specific nuclei that are clusters of neuronal cell body inside the brain proper, as well as the spinal cord. Okay. As far as white matter is concerned, lots of different words mean all the same thing. That just white matter in the central nervous system. Lots of different ways to say it. You can say column, tract, fasciculus, lemniscus, peduncle, commissure, decussation. You will hear all of these words this semester over and over again, and that's what it means. Nothing more than white matter tracks, or white matter axons traveling through. Now, that's the CNS. Let's talk about the PNS. So for the PNS, it gets a little bit easier. So as far as the, I'll put it down here to make it clear. So as far as PNS is concerned, okay, gray matter, if you're calling something gray matter in the PNS, it is called a ganglia, G-A-N-G-L-I-A. Okay, one ganglia, one famous or common ganglia we're going to talk about all semester, resides here in the spinal cord. That's in the neuronal cell body. And that is known as the dorsal root ganglia. Dorsal root ganglia, first motor neurons, and sensory system. We'll talk about all that as the semester goes on. But if you had to guess, what do you think would be the name for white matter in the PNS? It's a nerve. Yep, your white matter in the PNS is called a nerve. So let's put that here. So white matter in the PNS is going to be your nerve. Okay, that's the myelinated axon. Questions? You good? Okay. Remember this. Okay, remember these words. A lot of times people forget the outer cortical region is the gray matter, and that means neuronal cell body. So we will definitely come back to it as time goes on. So let's talk about the lateral surface of the brain. We're almost done. Lateral surface of the brain. Here it is. A lot of this is just review now. But kind of an important thing that you need to know. Thinking about the lateral surface of the brain, again, this is just a lateral view. If I had the label here, what's the name of this lobe? Temporal. Okay, here's my midbrain. Here's my pons. Here's my medulla. Here's my cerebellum. Now, overall, this is my cortical region. Here's my cortex, right? All the basic stuff. And I talked about this one sulcus here that's kind of in the center, separating frontal from parietal lobes. Does anybody remember the name of that one? Central sulcus, correct. Here's your central sulcus. And then I talked in the frontal lobe, there's going to be an important gyrus that we talked about just in front of the central sulcus. Anybody remember the name of that one? Yeah, that's your precentral sulcus, or your primary motor cortex. Okay, we'll just label it primary motor cortex. And that's a primary, that's just a 1 and a degree. Okay, and then right behind that we have in the parietal lobe your post-central gyrus, which is your primary somatosensory cortex. So nothing new, just a repeat. Okay. There's something very specific about the orientation or the representation of the body in both of these cortexes, of both the pre and post central gyri. Does anybody know what that is? What that's called? Has anybody ever heard of a homunculus? Okay, and a homunculus is nothing more than the representation of the body in this particular gyrus. And for the motor and somatosensory cortex, they're both the same. You can imagine a little man here that's standing on his head. So his head's going to be most at the bottom. His trunk's going to be here. His arms are coming out the side. Okay? His legs are coming off the bottom of his trunk, and just a little bit of his feet flip over to the inside. Okay? And that's that word, I'll write that down. He's called a homunculus. And that's nothing more than the somatotactic representation in that particular gyrus. And like I said, the somatosensory cortex has the same guy, or different guys, but he's still standing on his head with his feet flipping just over the side and his arms coming off of his trunk. Okay, that's a homunculus. And two more areas that I need to label for you. The first is something that if this area is damaged, pretty common in patients post-stroke with right hemicrucis, believe it or not. If this area is damaged, this patient population has difficulty producing sounds or the motor aspect of speech. So if I tell you that they have trouble with the motor aspect of speech, which lobe do you think it's in? What's motor associated with? Which lobe? Frontal, yeah. So this area, this is known as Broca's area. And if there's a problem with Broca's area, B-R-O-C-A''S, that's Broca's area. Broca's area is located just above the temporal lobe, in the frontal lobe proper. If there's damage to this region of the brain, then the person has difficulty with the motor aspect of speech. They understand you just fine, they just can't get the words out. It's very frustrating for this patient population. Okay, that's Broca's. It's called, if that person is going to be left with something known as Broca's aphasia. And then there's one more important area where if there's damage to this area, and this area spans both the parietal lobe and the temporal lobe, kind of a little bit right in here. Okay, if there's damage to this area of the brain, the person's not going to be able to understand you. They can talk just fine, but they talk what's called word salad. They might say something like the blue dolphin sky in the corner, and then just smile and nod. They don't understand at all what you're saying. This is known as Wernicke's area. WERNICKE'S area. Okay, so if you have damage to Broca's area, you have what's called Broca's aphasia. Aphasia is speech. And Wernicke's aphasia is damage to Wernicke's area. If you're damaged in both areas, you have global aphasia. It means you can't get the words out, and you also don't understand what somebody's saying. That's the most severe form of aphasia. You'll get more of that later in neuro. Questions? Okay. The last drawing of the day is going to be the medial surface of the brain. Yes? Homunculus. H-O-M-U. I'm a terrible speller, so let me look it up. H-O-M-U-N-C-U-L-U-S. It's called homunculus. Let's hear that again. Make sense?
Having trouble with the motor aspect.
Homunculus. What's your name? John. What's your question? Oh, great. Yeah, global aphasia is damage to both. Let me go back and show you a picture. I went too fast. Okay. Global aphasia is when there's damage. So let's say somebody's had a stroke, and the stroke has affected both Broca's area and Wernicke's area. That patient will be left with the inability to get words out, and they also can't understand what you're saying. Okay, so it's a combination of both motor aphasia or Broca's aphasia and Wernicke's. Yes.
So, like when they try, like if they do try and talk, they just sound like sounds, but not actually words.
Sound, but not actual word. Can they get the word? So, for example, what's your name? Diane. Cyan. Okay. Cyan had a question. She said, "What happens if it sounds like just not actual words, but so if you ask the person a question, say, what time is it? And they say, pretty cow. That's Wernicke's.
Yeah.
If you ask the person, what's your name? And they say, it might take 5 minutes to say John. That's Broca's. They can understand you. That's Broca's. Yes, that's Broca's aphasia. That's very common. It goes with right-handed persons. Does that help? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's very frustrating for that patient population. And we'll talk more about that in the rehab. What's the significance of the hook? Great question. We're going to work on that a little bit. Perfect question. And your name is Kayla. All right, get there. Any other questions about this? We're going to try and put all this together here in a little bit. All right, let's look at the last medial surface of the brain. It's dusty here. Nobody's been here all summer. Medial surface of the brain. Okay, last drawing. So we talked a little bit about this previously. If I had to say, what kind of section would this be? So if I took a saw and I ran it right down the middle of my head, what kind of section is that? What am I looking at? Sagittal, right? This is a sagittal section. Now, this structure that you've seen before, but I didn't label because you didn't know what it was. If I told you that this is that major area of white matter that connects left and right halves of the brain, you remember what that's called? We drew it a little bit ago. Yeah, this is going to be your corpus callosum. Good. So this is your corpus callosum. It's a good landmark. All right. Now, other things that I can see in the middle of the brain. There's going to be something, when we talk a little bit about pain, we're going to talk a little bit about pain perception and how pain travels up the STT. And there's something that's associated with something known as the limbic system. It's one of the gyri that's just above the corpus callosum. And you'll see it's associated with the limbic system. It's known as your cingulate. Cingulate, gyrus. Now your cingulate gyrus, it's the gyrus that sits just above the corpus callosum, and it's associated with the limbic system and interpretation of pain. Let's say that. Now, we talked a little bit previously about one of those gray matter islands. So it's a kind of nucleus that we labeled, and I said it's associated with sensory interpretation. And this is going to be your thalamus. Other things that we're going to talk about as the semester goes on. At the back of your midbrain, so here's your midbrain, right at the very back of your midbrain, there's going to be two little bumps. The uppermost bump is something known as your superior colliculus. Okay, superior colliculus, you're going to find out as the course goes on, we'll have a whole day on vision, is associated with vision. Has some special functions in vision. And then the last thing we're going to do is label the bottom piece. And if this is the superior colliculus, it's a little bump. What's the little bump right under it? Yeah, that's your inferior colliculus. And the inferior colliculus is associated with auditory processing, or hearing. Okay, and when we talk about how auditory sound, how sounds are processed in the auditory central pathways, we'll see the inferior colliculus. Questions? You're hanging in there, good. At the end of the day, I don't even know how I'm awake, but you guys are doing okay. I don't see anybody snoozing yet, so thank you. Let's go ahead.